Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. What time is it in the UK? It's just about 8 o'clock, I think, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
I'm Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona, and it is a delight to have Eve Chase here with us one day prior to publication day of her new novel, The Birdcage. Beautiful cover, by the way. I'm sure we'll
Thank
get
you very
into
much.
that.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
And Lisa Jewell, our good friend, best-selling author, has agreed to come in here and do some hosting duties. She's going to be talking about, this is her last book, The Family Upstairs, and here is the forthcoming novel, The Family Remains, which comes out here on August 9th, I believe, and we'll have signed copies. I will go ahead and put links to both of the books in the comments field. And if you have any questions for either author, just go ahead and put them in, and I'll be happy to come back on screen towards the end of the hour and ask any questions you might have. So Barbara in idyllic Santa Fe, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's so nice to see both of you and to meet you, Eve. I'm risking doing this outdoors in Santa Fe, so anything could happen. It could be a bird, it could be a police siren, but we'll find out. Anyway, Eve is the author of 3 previous novels, The Daughter of Foxcoat Manor, The Wilding Sisters, and Black Rabbit Hall. And The Birdcage, once again, involves drama within a fabulous house. So there's a community here in terms of what's going on, because Lisa's book, The Family Remains, is a follow-up. I don't know, should we actually call it a sequel, Lisa, to The Family Upstairs?
Apparently publishers don't like sequels, so I've been trying to avoid calling it a sequel, but it is a sequel. It is, yes.
But it's standalone as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, I tried to write it as a standalone, but everybody's been saying it's more fun if you've read the first one first, so.
Well,
It's
there
both.
are characters, we're 30 years on from the original story, as I understand it. And, you can certainly read The Family Remains without having read The Family Upstairs. But since this book doesn't come out till August 9th, here's your opportunity to first read The Family Upstairs, which is available in paperback. And then you can grab a copy. And since Lisa will be in the United States, although sadly not in Scottsdale, we will have autographed copies that we can sell you. So that'll be fun. But again, there is a house, 16 Chain Walk. And so the two authors are both like family drama, lots of characters, but they like them. It's not an Agatha Christie sort of a story, but Agatha Christie loved those big country houses. But maybe it's more like Daphne du Maurier. I don't know. So Eve, why don't you tell us a bit about, where is it? The Birdcage. Love the color. I mean, the cover. And I really like the idea of the artist's father and his messy personal life, his various lives, his way too many children.
He has way too many children and had too many lovers, too many mistresses. So he has 3 daughters, and it's told from the point of view of the 3 daughters. And their varying mothers kind of inform, their backstory kind of informs their relationship. So you have one of the daughters was, her mother was married to him, another one was his mistress, and the other one was his life model. And they all had a certain amount of overlap. So they will have quite a lot of conflict, I suppose, but there's a lot of love there too. And it flips between the 90s, riding up to the total eclipse, which was in 1999, when something terrible happened. And then the 3 sisters go back in 2019, and they have to kind of face what happens, and you find out what happens in a kind of rundown, almost as a sort of rundown clock as you get to the total solar eclipse. So it is very much a dysfunctional family, but lots of light and dark, I think.
Lisa?
Yes, so The Family Remains is a sequel to The Family Upstairs, but let's pretend it's not. And I will sell it on its own merits. So it opens with a bag of bones being found on the banks of the River Thames. And a detective is called to the scene, and he is charged with finding out who do these bones belong to, and what happened to the person who was the victim of the crime. And his investigations lead him back to this huge abandoned mansion in Chelsea on Cheyne Walk, which is one of the grandest streets in London, where 30 years earlier, 3 dead bodies had been found on the kitchen floor dressed in black robes with a hastily scrawled suicide note And meanwhile, upstairs in a cot in one of the bedrooms on the top floor, a 10-month-old baby was gurgling happily in a clean nappy, recently fed and looked after, but who on earth has been looking after her? That is the mystery. So that's it in a nutshell. There's an awful lot of other things going on in it. We're following two of the siblings who were brought up in this house where the dead bodies were found in their adult lives as they try and catch up with a third person who'd been brought up in this house as a child. And we also visit a woman who appears to be unconnected to the story completely, a woman called Rachel Rimmer, who is about to marry in haste and repent at her leisure to a man that she meets on holiday. So there's a lot going on.
So reading that, I remember thinking, you just run, go away, leave him.
Oh,
and you
yes.
can see them getting together. It's like it's just a delicious car crash, isn't it? But you know, he's very seductive.
Yes. Oh, I mean, I actually did find him quite physically attractive when I was writing him. He was very much sort of my cup of tea. And I could absolutely see that Rachel Rimmer, as a 33-year-old who's sort of all her friends are settling down, having he would have looked like the full package. But yes, knowing what we know as the reader, it is a little bit sort of like, don't do it.
It's great. It's fantastic going back to those characters. Sorry, interrupt. You go.
I was just going to say, I really like, you've done some unconventional characters too. I wanted Eve to talk a little bit about the parrot, because you can't really enjoy the birdcage if you don't know the bird.
Well, there's an African grey parrot, and so the great thing about African grey parrots is they can live for up to 60 years. So they're really good for if you want to tell a dual timeline story, because you can have they're still hanging in there, and they have the extraordinary memories, so they can just recount conversations. And I thought, what a great sort of plot device to have this parrot who would basically repeat conversations at the worst possible time, incriminating conversations. So it is a lovable parrot, but also quite obstreperous and a real pain. And one of the girls has a bird phobia, which is connected to what happened in the past, which I can't give away. But the parrot plays a role in that too. And actually, my cousin has an African grey parrot, and so during lockdown, when I was writing it, I had a sort of surreal moment of actually interviewing his parrot over Zoom, and he was, you know, he wasn't the worst interviewee. He kind of like sort of sat there and he squawked and he did some doorbell noises and mobile numbers, and then he can sort of chants to football like England. They had their voices are extraordinary, because you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that it was a parrot as opposed to a human.
Remind me what the name of the parrot is.
Bertha, the mad Bertha.
Bertha, that's it. That's it. And I always thought I quite liked parrots, but I found myself really quite terrified of that parrot when I was reading your book. I don't know why. I couldn't warm to it. I found it really sort of quite sinister, and this sort of the way she kept popping up.
It keeps popping up. I mean, African greys as well are real sort of what they call one-man parrots, one-woman parrots. They like to have one relationship. They're not the golden retriever of the bird world, you know, and they'll have your finger if they don't, they get a bad vibe off.
Yes, so I'm right to be slightly off put by the parrot.
I think so.
Yeah.
So the parrot and the birdcage are actually important in how the story goes because of the painting, because the artist who is responsible for most of the drama, in fact, is the painter called Charlie Finch, and he has a painting called The Birdcage with 3 of his children, if I remember right. Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it says Girls and Birdcage. Yeah, so he paints his daughters with this birdcage. His mum used to collect bird cages, so he puts it into the composition, and so it becomes known as Girls and Birdcage. And yeah, I know. Obviously, it's an obvious sort of metaphor, isn't it? And all the girls and all the daughters are trapped in a way in their own little narratives and in their own lives and secrets that they've created to hide from one another. And I suppose ultimately they each have to emerge from their cage to be united at the end.
Because that's the thing, in any sibling group, you've got that dynamic structure, haven't you, that's sort of instilled in the children as they're born in order.
Yeah.
Which informs their whole lives, you know, the youngest, the oldest, the middle, the sort of syndromes that are attached to those sorts of roles. But in this book, not only are they in sibling order, but they've got different mothers and different sort of stature in the family, depending on who the mother was and how the father felt about the mother. And it's so dysfunctional.
Yeah, I think so. But also I think I sort of amplified the thing which I find quite interesting about families, how even with, you know, with one mother, and I'm one of four, and I think we all have completely different experiences and different recollections of the same events. And so ultimately, you know, you can exaggerate that with different mothers, but I think within, as you said, within a family, you have this, everyone has very much their own point of view. So as a novelist, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, and I love that because I'm one of three sisters as well. So I always love reading books about sisters, but this was a real twist on the usual sisters theme, because they didn't grow up together.
No.
They just come together every year for their summer holidays, and I loved that aspect of it.
And do your sisters, do you think you remember things differently?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, I'm the writer of the family, and that's the cliche, well, isn't it? I'm the one, you know, when you're a novelist, you get asked to write pieces for magazines about your personal history and your family, and I put it out there in my version of events, and invariably, what my sisters would be like, that's not true. That's not how it happened. Yes, it's like, well, you know.
And are you in, out of interest, are you in the middle?
No, I'm the oldest, but only by 11 months. So I didn't get the benefit of really being the oldest child, because I was only a baby when my sister was born. So I didn't get the advantage.
I could tell you were an oldest child. You know, I'm an oldest child in my family too. I think oldest children have a certain, I don't know what imprint. I mean, there are lots of studies
charm,
about it.
Intelligence, beauty, depth.
Well, but you know, the experience, I mean, in my family, because I was born in 1940, so the war colored my early years. You know, I mean, we didn't have nobody had a car, and, you know, all kinds of things. My brother, who's 7.5 years younger than I am, has a totally different experience. He doesn't know what it is not to belong to a country club. You know, he didn't know. Even my sister was able to go to camp in the summer. But when I was eligible for that, my parents couldn't afford it. And, you know, so we really had three different childhoods. And I think that's certainly true in, you know, in Eve's story, but also your group in Chain Walk has a, you know, remarkably different.
Well, yes, that was 4 children who were brought up in the same household. But it was such a twisted, dysfunctional household. And so there's a boy and a girl in each family. And the Thompsons arrive, this is in the family upstairs, the Thompsons arrive when they are sort of 10 years old and 12 years old, and the other brother and sister who live in the house are also similar age. And then they go through this sort of 6 years of absolute hell and carnage as the Thompson father takes over the house and turns it into a cult. But yes, so that again, that's 4 children experiencing the same trauma, and each one of them reacting and having a completely different response to the experience that they shared in that house, and a different viewpoint on it as well. I think this is why it's just always endlessly interesting writing about families, isn't it?
Yeah, and also in The Family Remains, they're all carrying that legacy, aren't they? So Finn in particular, you know, he's moved on in time, but there's a part of him that's still in the house, really.
Yes. I mean, he's elusive in the first book, and now he's even more elusive in the second book, because that was the stance he took in the book. Yeah. In the story of their childhood, was to just remove himself from it and sort of pretend it wasn't happening. And so that was his way of dealing with it. Whereas Henry thought he had to manage it and be the hero. And
and Henry's even more. Actually, Henry's even more in the house, isn't he? I mean, he is
the house.
He is the house. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, he is the house.
No, he actually is. He took everything. He took everything that happened in those 6 years into himself, and it just coloured every single aspect of his life. I'm talking about him like he's a real person.
He does feel like a real person. He's so alive on the page, though. He really is. And I remember that whole sort of, I don't know if this is a pop psychology theory, but how one child in a family somehow becomes a conduit for things that go on, and some people can shed it, or they can turn it into ambition or huge achievements, and other people, it's still working through them. And I think with Henry,
Yes.
you still feel like even if he wrote 6 more books, he would be working through. He would never.
Oh,
he'd be working through it
absolutely.
till his last breath, wouldn't it?
Yes, and I did give him a little bit of resolution at the end of The Family Remains, and I won't spoil it by saying that I just thought, no, that Henry wouldn't be that easily solved for Henry. There has to be more complication than that. So yes,
such an interesting character.
Yes. Yeah, he is. I think he's definitely one of my favourites, without a doubt. But I'm not going to write about him again now. He's done. He's out there now.
Is he really done? Oh, I think it comes across when reading his narration. It's just, I just think, oh, Lisa's enjoying herself. Just feel it really. I can really feel it reading it.
Yeah.
But, you've got his voice absolutely down completely.
Oh, I was him. I was absolutely him. I just went along on the journey with him, and he just sort of carried me along. And it's just sometimes characters write themselves. God, that sounds really pretentious, but I hope you know what I mean, Eve, and you don't think I do pretentious. But sometimes they just do. They just show you who they are on the page, and you just sort of pen the words as they tell you basically who they are. And he was definitely that character. But yeah, there'll be more characters. Always more characters.
So I read your books back to back, and I thought it was interesting that you both chose to tell your stories in a very similar way. So do you want to talk a bit about how you chose to tell the story? Because it's not just it's not a linear narrative for either of you. Which one? Eve?
I would just say that I honestly think a linear narrative is one of the hardest things to write. I've never done it. I'm saying it's the hardest thing to write. I've never actually written a book with a linear narrative. I think that's a very different sort of skill set to what I have as a writer, and I can only write a story if I chop it up into different time periods and different perspectives and jump around and hop from person's perspective to person's perspective and see it from the past and see it from the present day, and then I kind of get much more of an idea of what the story is and where it's all headed. Whereas if I had just 1 or 2 characters and everything was happening in the order in which it happened, I think I'd just get lost. I would just flounder. I wouldn't know what I was doing. I don't know.
I think it would be a slower book, I think, if you had to do it like that. Inevitably, but I think when you're dealing with both sort of with events in time, aren't we? I mean, you've got a 30-year stretch. And I've got a 20-year stretch. And when you've got those times, you've got to be able to jump back and forth and sense of what's actually happened and the impact on the characters.
Yes, I mean, you could just have your person in the present day finding out things about the past or having conversations with people. They could tell them things that had happened in the past, but that's nowhere near as immersive when you're writing as actually getting your feet stuck in the past and just jumping in there and actually writing about it as it happens. So there are ways of writing about the past without actually having to put your characters there. But I don't think it's as satisfying or as colourful or as exciting, I think, as when you actually go there.
Well, I think you'd have loads of flashbacks. I think that's the problem. Whereas if you can actually go into the first person dramatic scene, can't you, if you're back and forth?
Yes, exactly. You can actually be there. And I mean, it works from a writing point of view, but I'm assuming that it's nice for readers as well to be transported into those scenes.
Well, it's not just.
Well, can I just say I don't even remember the
and I think
eclipse. Eve, I don't remember the eclipse.
So the eclipse. Do you mean in the book, or do you don't remember it?
I didn't remember it happening. I have no recollection of an eclipse in 1999, and it's one of the biggest parts of your book. It's the theme that runs through the whole thing. Is this amazing massive thing that happened and everybody was involved, and it felt in your book like it was this big nationwide obsession, and I don't even remember it happening.
You must be doing it. Well, it was. I remember that I've got this sort of spread of newspapers and stuff from around that time, and actually I was working on a newspaper in Kensington at the time, and I remember very clearly all of us trotting down to the Round Pond in Kensington Gardens and, sort of trying to find our eclipse glasses and borrowing, and watching it on the pond. And it was really eerie, and sort of, the hairs on my arms all went up, and it was extraordinary. And then the next day, sort of going down to a party in Cornwall actually, but actually in Cornwall was really where all the real keen
Right.
eclipse watchers all flooded down there because
And
it
that's
was
where
the
your
best,
book is
best
set.
view.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Then, yeah.
So implicit in
quite
all
lovely.
this is not just I mean, it's not a linear narrative, but it's also multiple points of view. You know, you don't have just one person telling us the story. So did you find, you know, when you started that did you have all those characters in your head, all those points of view, or did they develop as you write it?
I'll let Eve answer that.
Well, I knew my points of view, the sisters, from the beginning, and so I knew it would be 3 points of view, and actually one of those points of view is double because she tells the stories set in the past as well. So in a way, it's like 4 points of view, although two are one person. Yeah, I did. I knew because I had to know the characters before I start. So I don't completely outline, but I do want to know who they are and how they're different and what they all want really, and where they'll end up from the beginning of the story to the end. So I have a sort of character arc for them, and I've got to be able to distinguish the voices. So yeah, I did have them. What about you, Lisa?
Well, this was really interesting, obviously, because it's a sequel, which meant that I already had this huge cast of characters to choose from. And I knew I wasn't just going to revisit exactly the same structure and exactly the same points of view that I had in the first book, because that wouldn't interest me. I like the whole fresh start of a new novel and starting with a sort of blank page. So I knew I was going to have to use some characters from the first book, but I wasn't sure which ones they'd be apart from Henry. I knew that. But I also knew that I wanted to bring a new character into it. I actually ended up bringing 2 new characters into it. One of them just turned up on the page and just then wouldn't leave the book, which was my detective, Samuel Owusu, who was only supposed to be in the prologue. Because I don't do detectives. Detectives scare me because that's all police procedure and I get it all wrong and I don't really understand how it works. But yes, this detective turned up in the prologue and then he just stuck around. So he ended up being a second new character. And then Rachel Rimmer was the other new character who I'd always wondered about her from the first book, because in the first book, somebody dies. And before he dies, he mentions the fact that he has a wife in London. And she's called Rachel. And that's all we knew about her. And I've always been a bit, what his wife is like. Who is Rachel? Is she going to be sad that he's dead or glad that he's dead? How's she going to feel about it? How's she going to react when she gets the news that her husband's dead? So then I thought I'd really like to follow that up. And then I needed one more point of view, and it could have been Libby, who was the girl who inherits the big house in the family upstairs. I felt like I'd done with her. She'd kind of had a very, very, a unique purpose in the first book, which was to kind of be the detective character. So I went back to Lucy, who's Henry's sister. So yes, it was a sort of pick a mix kind of, like, who shall I use? What can I do? And those were the 4 I ended up with.
And did you know,
without Rachel, you couldn't really have, and I mean, not any spoilers here, but without Rachel, you couldn't really have one of the big threads of the story wrap up. I mean, we have to have her point of view in order for it to conclude. So
yes, but actually, interestingly, because I don't plan, I really, right up until the closing chapters, I didn't know how I was going to tie that up. I thought, well, I've set Rachel off down the road in this relationship with this man, and all we know about him is that he used to be married to Lucy, but really we could have written the book without her. She didn't have to be in it. I've just written it because I wanted to write it because I thought it'd be interesting. So that's sort of how it ties up at the end, was a bit of a sort of desperate kind of like, what am I going to do? I've got Rachel, how am I going to make this actually be part of the novel rather than just this random other story that I'd inserted there for fun? So yes, I was glad when I found a way to make it important and vital and make it look as you thought. Like I deliberately planned it all along.
Well, I did wonder. It was amazing. Eve, you had a character that I think, the mother, the what is she, the third wife or mother? Anyway, the unconventional one. I didn't think your story would have worked without her. And she's, so different. The wives or mothers, mistresses are all so different.
Do you mean the mother? Do you mean the Flora? Do you mean the sister? Or their mothers, second generation of mothers?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that I think, yeah, without wanting to sort of pigeonhole the women as kind of like, that's a mother, this is one's running a tech company. They did have to sort of really be different, and I wanted a mother in there to sort of to give that perspective really, and that also brought in the child, sort of adds in a sort of slight layer of peril into that reunion, I think, with the little boy.
Well, often womanizers run to type, but what was interesting about Charlie is the women are so different. He didn't,
Yes, well,
just always gravitate to the glamorous blonde.
Well, I think they're all slightly a reaction against the other, as in, so he initially sort of married somebody whose mother really approved of, and tried to do what he thought was the right thing, and then of course that went horribly wrong, and he had an affair with an American actress, and then she created it was the classic line, go off with the mistress and it creates a vacancy, and it certainly did. And then there was and the life model, but I think ultimately it does catch up with him. He can no longer bound into through his 60s of getting away with it. And I think at one point one of the sisters, one of his daughters, does say to him, "Dad, you get cancelled today," when he would, he wouldn't really be able to get away with it. But he was very much a sort of boomer artist, and was allowed to behave like that, I think.
So the incident, Lisa, that really kicks off the book in the prologue, you couldn't have written it without that specific location. I mean, I've always loved the Thames as an artery, flowing through London, not just geographically, but historically. And I always loved mudlarks. I thought, it's sort of terrible, but Victorian fiction and mudlarks down there and the whole bit. So I thought it was interesting that you did a modern version, but you really needed the river, didn't you, to make it work at the beginning?
Yeah, and I suppose that's an interesting thing about writing a sequel, is that you're kind of stuck with the things that happened in the first book.
Right.
So in the first book, the bones, it's written in the first book that the bones are thrown into the river. So that was kind of, I was stuck with that. I couldn't sort of throw it to the winds and just think, well, where would these bones be found? It's like, well, they're going to be found on the banks of the river because that's where they were thrown in the first book. But yeah, so yeah, mudlarking is now it's very different to what it was in in the olden days. It's a hobby. It's like metal detecting and what have you. So there's lots of rules around it, and you're not allowed to touch things, and there's a big code about it. But yes, no, it always had to be by the Thames, and there is something so enchanting about particularly that stretch of the Thames. I went for dinner with my husband in the city a couple of weeks ago, and it was a really warm, balmy night, and we'd had a bit to drink, and I just said, let's just keep walking. It's so lovely. And we walked all along the embankment, Victoria Embankment, and up towards Westminster that way. And there's a sense of history, and there's sort of the buildings and the atmosphere. There's something really essential and visceral about that part of London, those banks of the Thames. I don't know what it is.
I totally agree, and things do find stuff quite regularly, don't they? I mean, the mudlarkers. I was down there not so long ago with my 13-year-old daughter, just by that bit actually, and the tide was out, and watching all these people kind of going along, picking bits out of the mud. You just think, oh God, what are they going to find? And I was trying to explain to her that the sense of history in that part of the Thames, that it's been developed for so long. It has just it's like an archaeological dig of London, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. When you think what's gone up and down that river over 1,000 years, it's just, from every corner of the world, things have gone up that river, and it's just and people have lived, obviously back in the old days, people lived close up to the banks as well. It is fun to write about.
Well, it's not just the Thames. I don't know if you've ever read Christopher Fowler, either one of you. And tragically, we're not going to read him anymore because he is unfortunately announced he has terminal cancer. But in one of his marvelous books, it might have been the second or third, called The Water Room, he writes all about the other rivers that flow under London, like the Fleet and so forth, that have been built over. So the Thames is not just about the Thames, but it's in fact, about all the other rivers that run into
Yes,
it.
I live.
amazing.
I live near the Fleet, and you walk past the drain covers, and you can hear the river gushing under. This is under my house, basically. There, it's still there. That river. It's amazing.
I love writing when I various visits to London, I had a very good friend who lived in Greenwich, and I loved riding the boat all the way, commuting down to Westminster. And every time I went past Deptford, and I have a vision of Christopher Marlowe, and I think, what really happened at the tavern? Was he really a spy? Was it whatever it was? I mean, there's just such an incredible role of history, just taking and
You're
I tried
actually
to
making me
imagine
want to
how
do
the
a boat
tower would
trip.
have looked before London built up, when it would have
Yeah.
been huge and
Yeah.
scary to go past Trader's Gate. And now, it's still impressive, but it's dwarfed by,
Yes,
just
very
like
much
St.
dwarfed.
Paul's, is dwarfed, and it's remarkable. So
It
Eve,
is.
you have to do yours, really, or did you need to do it on a rocky cliff in order to make your house work? Because it's a nifty house.
Yeah, it's a lovely house. I love a house like that. So it's on the Atlantic coast of Cornwall, which is really, really quite wild, actually. It's beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. And so that's very much kind of around there. It's between Zena and St Ives. So it's always been it's always really attracted artists, actually. So you've got like the sculptor Barbara Hepworth, and you've got people like Virginia Woolf who loved it down there. She loved it down there because she said it was so beautiful, it's so lonely. She loved the loneliness of it, which is kind of the essence of that area. Is that it's quite it's remote, even today it's remote. So I wanted somewhere remote. I wanted somewhere with dodgy phone signals, which is always the problem, trying to get rid of the phone signal, give them a bit of dodgy Wi-Fi so they can't just kind of call for help. And they are there in the contemporary section in the middle of a beast from the east, it was called, a big ice storm. So they are stuck in that weather, and also their own internal weather, really forced to sort of deal with things. And I couldn't really have them on a sort of balmy spring day because they would just go and drive off. So yeah.
So I should ask before we call Patrick up, because everybody always asks this question anyway, what are you working on now, if you can talk about it? Eve?
Well, I am joyful that I have just finished my 21st novel. I finished it on Friday, and I've just been reading it through today. And yeah, done.
Congratulations, that's
done.
Amazing.
I know. So
you are just you're incredible, Lisa. I don't know how. When did you last file the last one?
Well, this is an unusual year. I think you know about this, Steve. In as much as I'm writing 2 books this year, 2 full-length fiction novels this year. So normally I finish my novels in December. So I've written this twice as fast as I would normally, so that I can start the second novel of the year in September. So yeah. So this is my 21st novel. It will be coming out next summer in the UK and the US. It does not have a title. It doesn't even have a working title. It's just called Book 21 at the moment. And it is about a famous podcaster who inadvertently becomes the subject of her own true crime podcast as she's recording it. So look, I actually finally wrote a book with an elevator pitch. So
very good. I like the title, actually.
What, Book 21?
Book 21, Lisa Jewell.
I'll just stick with it.
Yeah, fantastic. Quite
what about you?
Goes with the podcast. Yeah, I'm not nearly as efficient as Lisa, and I'm into my new book. Actually, it's in London and set in West London and Paris. So yes, which is really nice because I feel like I can actually go to these places. So the Birdcage was, I wrote it during lockdown. It's very sort of, it's incredibly taut, all the action happens within one space, and I just had this sort of yearning to sort of stretch the geography of the novel a little bit more, which is you have to kind of respond to. Sometimes you really just need to be in a bigger canvas. Don't you find, Lisa?
Oh, it works both ways. So The Family Remains is like globetrotter of a novel. It's here, there, and everywhere, and it was really unruly in some ways, trying to match the time zones between Chicago and London. So I've done the opposite of what you've done with the novel Book 21 that I've just finished. It's all set in this tiny corner of northwest London, and they never leave.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, it kind of works both ways. You kind of want to, sometimes you just want to
Yeah,
get a bit more focused. So what's yours
yeah.
about?
Well,
Well,
Patrick, why don't we see if you, I seem to be disappearing into the shade of the umbrella here, but there we go. Any questions that have come in or comments you want to make?
Let's see here. Ah, very good. I didn't know this either. Our spies, in the form of one of our viewers here, say that it may be somebody's birthday tomorrow.
Who's
oh,
that? Who knows
I
it's
wonder
my
who that
birthday
might
tomorrow?
be.
Who is it? What's the name? If it's somebody I know.
One L Jewell.
No, but who's the person who said it's my birthday
Oh,
tomorrow?
okay. Brigida or Brigida?
Rashida?
Brigida?
Oh, well, yes, it is. It's my birthday tomorrow.
oh,
And I'm
happy
actually going to
birthday tomorrow.
officially start my birthday the minute this is finished and go down to the pub with my husband and my daughter, because we're by the seaside. So we're going to go and have and it's been 36 degrees here. So we're going to go the minute this is finished to go and have an alcoholic beverage by the sea.
Very
So,
nice.
Oh,
yes.
happy birthday.
Yeah.
You know, Lisa, our events are all BYOB, but you know, at this time of day, I'm still drinking coffee. But you certainly
Yeah,
could have been-
sorry, you have to wait.
Right. So is this birthday 21 for Lisa?
21 again. Yeah.
I love it.
54. Crazy.
Lisa, just out of curiosity, what is the name of the podcast in the novel that you've just written?
Ah, right. So the woman is famous for a podcast called All Woman. So she interviews women who succeeded against all the odds, and that's what she's famous for. But when she stumbles into her own true crime podcast, it's called Hi, I'm Your Birthday Twin. That's the name of her podcast about the thing. Yeah.
Blimey. I
Ooh.
thought that
I
would
don't
be
know
a
how, I don't know how enlightening that is.
Well, I was thinking, you know, that might lend itself to be a good title for the book, is the name of her podcast. But
Yeah, Hi,
Right,
I'm Your
yeah.
Birthday Twin. It's not very catchy.
yeah, it
It's not
doesn't quite have the right
it's not
ring.
going to work.
No,
Unfortunately, titles are usually up to the sales department. So
absolutely. Yes,
know,
yes. Which
they
is
do
why
take
I no
suggestions.
point.
But
There's no point getting wedded to the idea of a particular title because you're never allowed to keep it. Although, what was your working title for the Birdcage?
It was all actually
Steve,
that was
It was
always
always
the
a
birdcage.
Birdcage. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite clear, that one. But you know, I titles are really difficult. I find them really hard. And actually, I think it's quite important to kind of not, as you say, not to get too wedded, because then you
Yes.
can become blinkered, and then you publish, and then a sort of, you know, a few years later, oh, why don't you
Yes.
use that title?
Yes. Exactly. You fought for it, and then you're like, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Let's see. A question has come in from Diane for you, Lisa. Will there be more books for the family upstairs?
No, there won't be. I did honestly, once you've read this book, you'll realize what a bloody good job I did of tying everything together and giving a really neat, satisfying ending that should make everybody happy. And I don't think it would just be really messy to unpick it all now. I think the first book definitely invited a sequel, but I don't think this one does. So no, although I might bring my detective back because I liked him very much.
Yeah, he's very good. I mean, the book, I mean, I've just read it, finished it a couple of days ago, and I absolutely just think it's just absolutely brilliant. I mean, I didn't really know how you were going to follow the family upstairs. It is a perfect
Oh, thank
sequel.
you. And do you
No, I
agree with me
really-
that it's time to stop? Or that
Well,
it's-
I'm in two minds because I love the characters, and I would definitely love to read more about them. But I can also see that you have threaded it. It is a tight knot at the end, so you would have to unpick it. And it is
Unpick it a lot,
perfect
yeah.
as it is. It is.
Thank
Did
you.
you when you finished that? Did you think, done? I cracked it. I'm golden. That's it.
You mean as in this is a really, really good book, or I'm
Yeah.
done
Did
with
you
this?
did you realize it? Did you? Because it must be
No.
because the family upstairs was obviously a hugely loved book and huge success. So
Yeah.
did you have the
No.
pressure of that, or?
Well, I actually had a really interesting experience writing this book because this was a book that was shadowed by an academic who was writing a book about me
Oh,
writing
yeah.
the book. So there's a book that's come out in the UK, Barbara and Patrick, and it's called The Truth About Lisa Jewell, and an academic shadowed me writing The Family Remains. And part of that was me sending him the book as I wrote it, which I haven't done that since my first novel. Actually sent a work in progress to somebody. So I got kind of a lot of feedback from him that made me feel like I was on the right track, and he was a big fan and he loved The Family Upstairs. So I sort of, I suppose, felt a little bit like, well, if he likes it and he's a big fan of The Family Upstairs, then maybe I haven't gone too horribly wrong. But to say golden, no, nobody ever feels like that when they finish the book, do they?
No, I don't.
No.
I don't. But I always think it wouldn't have been. Maybe one does sometimes. I don't know.
I don't
and
think so.
There's passages. I think I never really think a book's any good until someone else reads it and says, "Oh, that's really good." I'm like,
That's exactly right. That's when the magic starts. That's when you feel like a proper writer. You never feel like that until it's gone out in the world and people have read it and had an experience with it and shared that experience with you, and then that sort of feels like you've entered the golden bit happens then, but not when you finish writing it, I don't think. Well, maybe not yet. Maybe it will happen.
I think it will with that book. I think everyone's going to absolutely love it.
Yeah, Patrick and I have talked, as you know, to hundreds of authors over the last, actually, we're going to be 33 years old as a bookstore in October. But it's so interesting because, you both are in the world building camp, which also applies to science fiction and fantasy and to a great degree to romance writers, where, the fun is creating the whole universe and populating it and doing that. But then we talk to other people, who absolutely love the series. They like, revisiting the characters. They like to look at their past. They almost always end up writing some kind of a prequel because, you picked an arbitrary date to start the series character. And then as you develop them, you want to learn more about how they got to be at the place that you began. And it's just interesting, because people gravitate towards one or the other, however your mind works. And I did read in your acknowledgement, Lisa, that you really didn't want to write a sequel, but you liked Henry Lamb and you were interested in spending a little more time in his head. But I thought you made it very clear that this was it. I always think it's great to read the acknowledgements at the end. Don't read them at the beginning because they're spoilers, but it's always interesting to see what the author has to say about the book when you finished it. And I thought Lisa made a pretty clear statement.
Yes, that there's no more.
Well, but why you wrote it and why there will be no more.
It was a combination of wanting to get back into Henry Lamb's head, and also just so many people on social media messaging me, not just saying, "Oh, please, would you write a sequel?" but actually, you're talking about series, actually assuming that there was going to be a sequel, finishing it and thinking, well, there's clearly going to be another book. So that we just thought, oh gosh, maybe I should do this.
Well, now that you've done it, you don't have to do it again. There we go. Patrick, anything else? Sorry, I barged in there and took us off in a direction.
No problem. I just wanted to ask maybe both of you about, you mentioned the Thames, and how an endless source of fascination that river is and its history. And are there any novels? I mean, I know there's quite a body of literature about the river, both fiction and nonfiction. Do you each have favorites? There was one that I read a number of years ago, you might know, called Down River by Ian Sinclair, which is just fascinating. Any favorite?
Well, I'm not a reader, right? I'm hoping that Eve can come in after me and give you all the heavyweight, like the classic.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think of the.
Yeah, I would very highly recommend. Gosh, and I now don't know if she was ever published in America. But there's an author called Penny Hancock who wrote her first three novels were all set on the south side of the river, I think in Woolwich, Greenwich, and maybe Deptford, actually, Barbara. And the stories are completely interwoven with the setting. It's all about, you can smell that filthy river. They're contemporary thrillers. Psychological thrillers. And you can just smell that filthy river and just see the green algae on the top and the sort of bits of rubbish floating. Just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So that's my recommendation if you want to read contemporary thrillers set in the grimy outer reaches of Thames. Penny Hancock. So over to you, Eve, for some classics.
I'm just thinking, well, yeah, I was thinking actually contemporary wise, Louise Candish wrote that brilliant book
yes.
about the boats, didn't she?
The Other
It went
Passenger,
down
Louise
the other
Candish.
passenger, yeah,
Yeah.
which is actually set on the boats where you know
Right.
you do the commuting
The
boats,
riverboat,
and that was
yes.
the riverboat, yeah, the Thames Clipper, whatever, isn't it? And it was just, it's a really good setup.
Passenger,
But
you
I was
said?
thinking, sorry,
The Passenger is the title?
The Other
yeah, the
Passenger.
other,
It came out a year or two ago, I think. I remember
Oh.
reading it, and yeah,
Yes, probably last year, I would have thought, in America.
something
yeah.
like that.
but
And
I
I
think
recommend The Water Room once again by Christopher
Water Room.
Fowler, because it's absolutely amazing. Because you know the Thames, after all, it starts up near you, Eve, up around Oxford, and
Yeah.
then as the Isis and whatever, and then it gradually comes down and gains strength, and all these other rivers flow into it. I mean, there are a lot of Roman mysteries where the Thames is important too. So it's hard
There's
to.
that
You-
science
but you know
fiction guy, Ben Aronovich, I'm sorry to interrupt, who's written a number of books about the Thames too, Aronovich.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the big meaty one, is it Peter Ackroyd, who's written the big non-fiction biography of the Thames? It's absolutely fantastic. You can sort of dip in and out of it, no pun intended. But actually the Thames does, yeah, as you say, this does start not too far from me, and it's extraordinary if you go down there. My husband's actually walked the Thames Park. He's a bit of a walker, and so he's traced it, and it really is just like a trickle that comes out of a stone, and then it grows and grows and grows, and they could only get
That's
boats.
incredible.
I know, and you could only actually get the boats up to transport things not that far further into the countryside, because it just wasn't deep enough, and it really just roils, and everything just speeds up as you get towards London in the most extraordinary way. And if you saw, because I swim in the Thames here, and it is, I mean, it's not, it's not perfect. You do get the odd cow patch and things floating down. It's not clear waters, but it's compared to what happens when he gets to London, and it's
You get to Deptford.
you get to Deptford. So it's
Yeah.
a different beast. It's a different beast altogether, isn't it, down there?
Yeah.
Probably like
I
the
think-
East River in New York.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like the Mississippi. You can go to Hackensack, Minnesota, and actually jump over the Mississippi River, which is where it rises.
So weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they all have that thing, don't they? Those big rivers, when they get to the big cities, there's actually, if you fall in, I mean, the awful thing about the Thames, that even if you're a really good swimmer, you can fall in at certain points, and you just vanish.
Yeah.
And it's it's true. They just, you really have, you can swim, but they just have these strange currents and eddies, and when they go under the bridge, they create these sort of inner whirlpools within the river, and dangerous,
Very dangerous.
as well as beautiful. Yeah.
But fascinating. Anything else, Patrick?
Yeah, let's see here. Sophia, she asks, may I ask what you are reading? I guess for both of you.
Oh,
Well, I literally finished Lisa's new one yesterday, and it's one of those ones I I felt so emotional at the end of it. I've had to take a bit of a have had to take a bit of a break. Right?
have you got a book hangover?
I got a book hangover, so then I go onto
Oh.
a magazine for a bit. But I'm about to pick up Claire Douglas's. I think it's called The Girls Who Disappeared, which is meant to be brilliant.
Yes, that's
Are
what
you
I'm
reading
reading.
that?
I was just
very
looking
good.
around for it, but it's not in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
room. I've just remembered it's in another room. That's what I'm currently reading.
Ah, there you go.
I'm halfway
I mean,
through it, and it's very, very, very excellent.
What? I
indeed,
didn't
yes.
catch it. What?
Claire Douglas, The Girls Who Disappeared. She did The Couple at number 9, which was a massive hit here. Was it big in America? I don't know.
Not hugely.
No. Okay. Well,
But we'll take a look at it. This week, Ruth Ware's book, The It Girl, is out and getting a lot of attention. And,
yes.
it has an Oxford setting, very much
Campus.
college sort of
Yeah.
thing. And everybody likes dark academia, that's a really interesting subgenre, so to speak, of
Yes.
suspense
Yeah.
thrillers, which is great.
Definitely.
We ought to let Lisa move on with her birthday celebration, unless there's something that we can't move past. Patrick, is there?
Let's just check Facebook real quick. Let's see. No, people just saying how much they like both of your books.
Oh,
No real questions. Do you have it,
Wonderful.
actually, real quickly before you leave, I know we have at least one or two aspiring writers who are watching. Do you each have like a short little thing, words of inspiration you can give to somebody who's trying to write a book for the first time, maybe?
Go
Yeah, I would just say you have to keep going, and you have to go through those moments of self-doubt, which they tend to come at different points in the book, and then just see the first draft as the skeleton that you can flesh out and massively improve. And I think you just have to sort of have faith in yourself. It's really kind of a bit of a cliche, but you have to trust the process, don't you? And you keep going until you can make it right and see it almost like a piece of clay that you keep having to keep throwing and reshaping until it's right.
Yeah, I think there's this thing, particularly when you've never written a novel, when you get to our stage, you'll absolutely, you've reached an acceptance of the fact that there's a book that lives inside your head, and then there's the book that you write, and they're two completely different things. And it's natural to feel disappointed when you start typing and you're like, oh, this isn't working. This isn't what I thought it was going to be like. I thought it was going to be better than this. I thought it would be easier than this. I thought it was going to be more fun than this. And that's something you should disavow yourself of, because writing so often doesn't feel like fun at all. Sometimes it just feels downright boring. It just feels like you're literally just typing words and there's no magic happening at all. And that's completely normal. I sometimes do a piece of writing that I had no pleasure in writing at all, and I come back to it the next day thinking I'm going to have to delete it, and I read it, I think, oh, actually that's quite good. But the way you feel when you're writing, I don't think bears much relation to how the writing is. But yes, I would totally back up what Eve says. It is just absolutely keeping the faith and just going forwards and forwards and forwards, and being as productive as possible, and not worrying too much or overthinking too much about perfection, or the fantasy book that lives inside your head. Just get that book down. And then
Do you each keep a schedule that you adhere to, or is it just kind of depending upon when the deadline is?
Well, I write a book a year. I'm contracted to write a book a year, so my life is very cyclical in terms of I deliver in December, I edit in January to March, I start again in March, I deliver in December, so I kind of just stick to that. What about you, Eve?
Yeah, I take longer to write, so but I do, I mean, depending on the stage of the book, I tend to just do normal hours at the beginning, and then towards the end and the deadline coming up, I'm then sort of 7 days a week, which I sort of groan about, but actually it's my favorite bit, because I just love that bit of being totally immersed in the book. And that's actually for me when all the magic happens and I suddenly see all the little plot twists and ways of rethreading it. But so maybe I would like to be able to sort of condense my writing life down to be just really immersive, but from 9 to 5, and then it'd be quicker.
Well, thanks so much.
Indeed. So here we have
Thank you so
The
much.
Birdcage by Eve Chase, which is wonderful. And Lisa Jewell's book out August 9th, The Family Remains. So let me encourage you both let me encourage viewers to pick up a copy of each wonderful reading. And it's such a pleasure to meet you, Eve, and wonderful to see you again, Lisa.
Really lovely as well.
So
Really
thank
lovely.
you both.
Can't wait
Happy
to see you in
birthday
real
to
life.
Good night.
Good
Yeah,
night.
happy
Good night,
birthday.
everyone.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.